Good evening and welcome to Perspectives. I'm Sebastian Gomes. While people around the world await a decision by American lawmakers on whether or not to approve military action against the Syrian government, Pope Francis has been making consistent appeals for peace. As we told you yesterday at the general audience, he urged Catholics and non-Catholics around the world to participate in a day of prayer and fasting for peace this coming Saturday. Special announcement for you, Salt and Light will be broadcasting the prayer vigil live from St. Peter's Square on television and online. That begins at 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific time. Please join us and the Church around the world for this important event. This morning at the Vatican, Archbishop Dominique Memberti of the Secretariat of State addressed the entire diplomatic corps accredited to the Holy See. This special meeting was called to formally let the ambassadors know the position of the Holy See in the current conflict in Syria and its grave implications for the Middle East and the entire world. Memberti told the ambassadors that the Holy See cannot remain silent before the tragedy that has unfolded there. This past Sunday, Pope Francis addressed the vast crowd in St. Peter's Square about the judgment of God upon history and our actions at the present moment. In Syria, there have been over 110,000 deaths, countless wounded, and more than 4 million refugees have fled to neighboring countries. Faced with this tragic situation, the international community must work to end the violence. Memberti stated that there are 3 general principles that must guide our efforts to seek a just solution. First, to restore the dialogue between the parties and reconcile the Syrian people. Second, to preserve the unity of the country, avoiding the creation of different areas of division. Finally, to ensure not only Syria's national unity, but also its territorial integrity. The growing presence of extremist groups in Syria is of deep concern to the Vatican and to the entire world community. Memberti pleaded with the diplomatic corps to oppose such extremist groups and distance themselves from them, as well as to openly and clearly oppose terrorism of all forms. And Pope Francis, like we said, has continued to be proactive on this front. He recently sent a letter to Russian President Vladimir Putin ahead of the G20 summit that's being held in St. Petersburg this year. In his letter, the Pope argued that peace is a necessary condition for international development, and he denounced all forms of war and violence, saying, "Wars are a concrete refusal to pursue the great economic and social goals that the international community has set for itself." And he cited there the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, which, among other things, is working to halve global poverty by 2015. He also urged the G20 leaders not to remain indifferent to the dramatic situation of the Syrian people. Another Jesuit is also weighing in on the Syrian crisis, Father Adolfo Nicolas, the Superior General of the Society of Jesus. In an interview yesterday with the Independent Catholic News, Father Nicolas questioned whether there is definitive evidence to suggest one particular group of people is responsible for the use of chemical weapons in Syria. He also called any military intervention, like the ones being planned by the United States and France, an abuse of power and a terrible mistake that would have a particularly disturbing impact on the ordinary, innocent, and poor people of Syria. The Archdiocese of Toronto and many others across the country are responding to the Pope's call to unite in prayer on Saturday evening. Cardinal Thomas Collins has announced that he will preside and preach at the 5 p.m. Mass that day. Following Mass, there will be a holy hour, including exposition of the Blessed Sacrament, recitation of the Rosary led by the Cardinal, and an opportunity for silent prayer. We've received many press releases from Canadian dioceses about their plans for Saturday, and we encourage all of you to check your diocesan websites to see how you can participate locally. Going back to Rome briefly, Pope Francis has resumed his morning Masses in the Vatican Guest House, and in his homily today he spoke about how Jesus never asks us to follow him without telling us what our mission is. There is always a promise, a request, and a mission, and these are linked to prayer. Francis concluded by saying, "There is no prayer in which Jesus does not inspire us to do something." Some provocative words there about prayer leading up to the vigil on Saturday. And today is the feast day of Blessed Mother Teresa of Calcutta, the founder of the Missionaries of Charity, who number 4,700 sisters serving 652 missions in 125 countries, many of which are in the midst of war and poverty. In Syria and Egypt, for example, the sisters are working quietly for peace among the poorest of the poor and the victims of violence and war. And we remember them especially on this day. For more on Mother Teresa, please visit our blog. And our good friend Lino Rulli, better known as the Catholic Guy from Sirius XM Satellite Radio, is in Toronto promoting his new book called Saint, Why I Should Be Canonized Right Away. I had the chance to speak to him about it a short time ago. All right, Lino, thanks for joining us today. You got to tell us about this book. I never really thought of you as a saint, I have to admit, but
Thank you.
What's the premise here?
The premise is to start getting you to think of me as a saint, because apparently that's not the first thing people think of. My first book was called Sinner. Everyone got behind that one very quickly because everyone could look at me and go, yeah, that sounds about right, sinner, yeah. The idea about saint is the idea really that comes from the church, so this isn't completely an original plan of mine. The church says we're all called to holiness. The church says we're all called to heaven. The church says all in heaven are saints. So if you and I and anybody else who wants to try to get to heaven actually makes it there, we're all going to be saints. So it's a way of looking at ourselves not only as the miserable sinners that we truly are, but to also try to see how, with God's grace, we're called to holiness and eventually going to be up there in heaven.
Who is the target audience for this particular book? Did you have a particular group in mind of people within the church or, a wider general audience?
I try to really target it to guys named Lino somewhere in the early 40 age group. Now, I don't know if that's going to be too narrow of a target or not.
We'll see how many get sold there.
One. If I buy one. I haven't decided if I'm really committed to this thing yet.
Right.
No, the strange answer really is in some ways me, but I want to broaden that out and say the average Catholic. Or the average person that was raised Catholic but isn't totally involved with the church, because me through my teens and 20s, that's a good description. If you said, well, what are you? I'd say, ugly. And if they said more specifically, I'd say, Catholic. But I never really got involved, and maybe I'd go to church on Sunday and maybe I wouldn't, but I didn't understand it was a mortal sin not to, and it was a lot of confusion in my life, right? But if I would have read a book like this, I would have thought as saints as only the most holy, pious, devout monks and nuns of the 1300s or 1500s. Mm-hmm. And I would never have thought that God is asking me to be a saint or is asking you to be a saint. And it makes you uncomfortable to imagine that in our sinfulness we could become saints or we could be role models or we could be holy. So the book is for people who would wrestle with that and struggle with that. So if you're a mom with 5 kids, maybe you and I don't have a total amount in common in theory, but does she understand that she's called to be a saint or not? And can she relate to a lot of the saints in the church? So I'm hoping the idea is if you could think of me as a saint, you could see yourself as a saint, and you could see all of us as called to holiness.
Do we have a misconception of what it means to be holy today in the Catholic Church?
Oh, I think so, because I think that there's this idea that if you're holy, you're this porcelain statue that you see in the church, because that's the saint you see. You see a porcelain statue like this, you see a painting, and you go, that's holiness. And by the way, you ever noticed very few saints smile in their statue, in the paintings? Well, a lot of us smile in our real lives. A lot of us aren't completely miserable to be around. Now, granted, if I was dying of the plague, a painting of me would be like bummed out too. So I think our misconception of the saints is nothing other than misunderstanding who we are in the eyes of God. And we're supposed to live our lives to the full, with joy, with happiness, and with holiness. But holiness is not fake and it's not contrived. It's to come from within, and it's supposed to be filled with joy.
What's been the response to the book so far? I know it just came out. It's literally hot off the press, but yes. What's the response been like?
People hate it. It turned out to be a horrible decision on my part, and the publisher is suing me.
Very good.
No, people, so far, the folks who read my type of book that I would write are slower. Let's not kid ourselves. So, they're going to take their time to read this book because they're,
it's written in very simple English?
Yes, it's in very simple English.
No Latin in there?
No, there is a little bit of Latin because I tell some stories about what it was like to be at the election of Benedict XVI, as well as the election of Pope Francis. Not that Benedict XVI wasn't a pope. At Pope Benedict XVI's election and Pope Francis's election, and I compare and contrast those experiences. So there's a little bit of Latin there. Otherwise, it's in English, and I sound like a jerk if I say this, but so far people seem to like the book. And we've gotten no refunds requested so far, and I think that's always a big success.
Okay, I can't let you leave today without asking you this. We've been at a lot of the same big church events over the past year, the Synod of Bishops, the conclave to elect Pope Francis, World Youth Day, Rio, Pope Francis' first international visit. what was the most, incredible moment for you, and what do you think about Pope Francis so far?
Well, first of all, Sebastian, you and I go way back. We went to the same university together. We went to the same graduate school together. Now, we didn't actually go at the same time. This isn't whiteout in my hair. This is actually going gray. So we even go farther than that.
That's right.
But beyond all of those experiences, it's so tough. I mean, this is some year for Catholics. If you're not happy to be Catholic this year, you're never going to be happy to be Catholic. If you're not proud to be Catholic this year, you're never going to be proud to be Catholic. The election of the Pope, Rio was such an enormous success. I'm a guy who enjoys the beach and doesn't mind having a drink on the beach. So 3 million Catholics celebrating faith, and as Pope Francis called it, a party of faith, is always going to be very close to my heart. But Francis, on the radio show I host, I was broadcasting live from Vatican Radio, when the white smoke came out and such. But right before the white smoke, about an hour beforehand, we were running over some names of cardinals of who might be the next Holy Father. And I was wise enough to say, well, Jorge Maria Bergoglio, he's too old, and that's not the future.
That's a quote unquote.
That's a quote. In fact, it's a chapter in my book, That Is Not the Future, because I'm such a brainiac. I know how to predict the future so well. And when his name was announced, I was stunned, like a lot of people. And to contrast the reaction I had when Benedict XVI was elected, I knew Cardinal Ratzinger, I knew what kind of man he was, I knew how holy he was, I knew how great it would be for the church. And when Francis was elected, when Bergoglio was elected, I said, oh, that's the guy I predicted 2 hours ago wouldn't become Pope. I hope he doesn't have satellite radio. And then when he stood there and stared out at the crowds, I didn't know what to make of this guy. And when he started to talk, and he smiled, and he was so humble, and he asked for prayers, I said, this is going to be a papacy like no other. And you can put me in the group of pretty much everybody on planet Earth, it seems, who loves this guy and is completely taken aback by how revolutionary he is in simply being a Christian. So I'm a fan, and it seems that no matter where I go, and certainly not just from our Catholic friends, my friends all over the spectrum, atheists and everything else, go, well, I don't know what it is with this Pope Francis, but you got something with him, and so it's fantastic.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on, Rulli, and thank you for this amazing gift of a secondary relic. You gave me this little modern-day reliquary with a piece of your shirt inside of it. So.
Yeah, once I'm canonized, you see, sometimes they're not right hot off the presses. So there you go. That's the reliquary. There's a prayer on the back. We got votive candles. So I'm getting all the externals ready for my canonization.
Well, thanks very much. You're now inserted into my daily prayer schedule.
Thank you. Well, I'll be in your prayers, literally, then pray to me and I'll pray for you.
Perfect. Thanks a lot, Lino.
Thank you.
Lino's book is available on Amazon, and you can listen to him on Sirius XM Mondays to Fridays from 5 to 7 p.m. That's it for Perspectives tonight. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you again soon.